On a freezing night in April 1912, three of the richest men who ever lived went to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. 20 months later, the government of the United States handed control of its money to a private circle of bankers. A great many people believe those two events are the same story, that the most famous shipwreck in history was a murder. This is the story they tell. To understand the theory, you first have to understand how terrifying the bankers of 1912 really were. It had happened before. In the autumn of 1907, the banks of America began to fail, one after another. Panicked crowds lined the streets, desperate to pull out their savings before the money was gone. There was no central bank to save them. So, one man did. J.P. Morgan locked the country's financiers in his private library and wouldn't let them leave until they had bailed out the entire nation with their own money. For 3 nights, a single private citizen decided which banks in America would live and which would be allowed to die. When it was over, Wall Street had learned a terrifying lesson. The richest nation on earth had no way to save itself. It had been forced to beg one private banker for its life. They swore it would never happen again. They would build a bank of their own, one that they controlled. One private banker had more power than the United States Treasury. Congress was terrified of him. They called it the Money Trust, a handful of men with their hands on every railroad, every bank, every telegraph wire in the country. They owned the steel, the shipping, the railroads. When they wanted a company, they took it. When they wanted a law, they bought it. And at the very center of the web sat J.P. Morgan. By one government count, this cartel controlled 341 corporate boards, worth $22 billion. To the public, it looked like a shadow government, and it had one dream left to fulfill. In November of 1910, 6 of the most powerful men in America did something extraordinary. They vanished. A senator and 5 bankers boarded a sealed railroad car in the dark. They were told to use only their first names so that not even the porters could ever testify who had been aboard. Their cover story was a duck hunt. One of them, Paul Warburg, showed up dressed head to toe as a hunter, a man who had never fired a gun in his life. For a week, on a private island off the coast of Georgia called Jekyll Island, in total secrecy, 6 men wrote the blueprint for a new American central bank. These were not ordinary men. Nelson Aldrich, the most powerful senator in the country, whose daughter had married a Rockefeller; Paul Warburg, a banking genius from Europe; Frank Vanderlip, who ran the largest bank in America. Together, in that single room, they controlled perhaps a quarter of the wealth of the entire world. They wrote their plan and gave it a respectable, patriotic name. And when the public discovered that bankers had secretly written it, they simply changed the name and passed it anyway. One of them, the banker Frank Vanderlip, later confessed it in his own memoir. "I was as secretive," he wrote, "indeed, as furtive as any conspirator." They hid that meeting from the country for a quarter of a century. The Federal Reserve was not born in a debate. It was born in a conspiracy. And that part is not a theory. That part is history. But the plan had a problem. 3 problems, to be exact. 3 men rich enough and stubborn enough to stop it. John Jacob Astor IV, the richest man in the world. $87 million, nearly $3 billion in today's money. The story goes that he stood against the banker's scheme. Astor was also the most scandalous man in America. At 47, he had divorced his wife and married a girl of 18. New York society turned its back on them, so he fled to Europe with his pregnant young bride to wait for the scandal to fade. They were finally coming home on the Titanic. Benjamin Guggenheim, mining royalty, and Isidor Straus, the owner of Macy's, and a former congressman who knew exactly how Washington could be bought. Guggenheim's fortune came out of the earth in copper and silver and gold. He was worth $25 million, and he was crossing the ocean, as it happened, in the company of his mistress. And Isidor Straus had come to America as a penniless immigrant and turned a small corner store called Macy's into the greatest shop on earth. He and his wife Ida had not spent a night apart in 40 years. To the men of the money trust, the believers say, these three were the last powerful obstacle between the cartel and total control of America's money. And then, conveniently, all three of them booked passage on the very same ship. The Titanic, the largest moving object ever built by human hands. Unsinkable, the newspaper said. She was a floating palace. The richest people in the world booked passage simply to be seen aboard her. And the world was told she could not sink, a claim her own builders never actually made, but one that everyone desperately wanted to believe. And she belonged, through a chain of companies, to J.P. Morgan himself. Morgan had his own private suite booked on that maiden voyage. His name was printed on the passenger list. And at the last possible moment, he canceled. He stayed behind in France and quietly had his priceless art collection taken back off the ship before it sailed. The story goes that the warnings came in all night, iceberg after iceberg, and were ignored, that a ship this size carried lifeboats for barely half the souls aboard, that another ship sat silent on the horizon and never came. And there was the detail that would haunt the story forever. The lookouts, straining into the dark for icebergs, had no binoculars. The officer who held the key to the locker had been pulled from the crew days before sailing and carried the key away in his pocket. The men watching for death that night were watching with their bare eyes. The greatest ship ever built carried 20 lifeboats for more than 2,000 people. Enough, by the letter of the law, because the law measured lifeboats by the weight of the ship and not by the number of lives aboard it. At 20 minutes to midnight, the unsinkable ship found its iceberg, and the three richest men in the world had 2 hours left to live. John Jacob Astor put his pregnant young wife into a lifeboat, lit a cigarette, and stood back. A survivor called him the calmest man on the ship. When his body was pulled from the sea days later, they found $2,500 still in his pockets and his gold watch. His son was born 4 months after he drowned. He never met his father. Benjamin Guggenheim changed into his finest evening clothes. "We've dressed up in our best," he said, "and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." Isidor Straus was offered a seat and refused to go before the women and children. His wife Ida refused to leave him. "Where you go," she told him, "I go." As she turned back to her husband, Ida gave her heavy fur coat to her terrified young maid and told her she would not be needing it where she was going. The old couple were last seen arm in arm as the deck slipped under the water. 1,500 people died in the freezing dark that night, and among them, the story goes, every single man who could have stopped the bankers. 20 months later, 2 days before Christmas, in 1913, the president signed the Federal Reserve Act into law. The bankers' plan, the one written in secret on Jekyll Island, became the law of the land. They signed it when half of Washington had already gone home for the holidays. Quietly, in a hurry, in the dark of the year, exactly the way its authors had always preferred to work. The men who might have stopped it were at the bottom of the Atlantic. The cartel got its bank, and J.P. Morgan was safe and dry and richer than ever. For the believers, the case is closed. A perfect crime. There is just one problem. Almost none of it is true, and the moment you check the story against the record, it comes apart in your hands. Start with the motive. The three men, supposedly murdered for opposing the Federal Reserve, did not oppose the Federal Reserve. In 1911, the New York Times reported that John Jacob Astor was in favor of it. Isidor Straus spoke in support of it, and Guggenheim never said a word about it either way. In fact, three of the richest men alive would have made a fortune from a central bank, exactly like Morgan. The theory kills the wrong people for the wrong reason. Because the men who actually fought the Federal Reserve were not on that ship. They were populist politicians: Charles Lindbergh, Robert La Follette, William Jennings Bryan, and they fought it the boring way, with speeches on the floor of Congress. You cannot sink a senator. And Morgan? His cancellation is documented to death. He stayed for his art shipments and his sulfur baths. Historians have known the mundane reason for over a century. Worse for the theory, the sinking was a financial catastrophe for Morgan. His shipping company took a staggering loss. No one sabotages his own property into bankruptcy. And here is the fact that ends it. J.P. Morgan died in March of 1913, 9 months before the Federal Reserve Act ever passed. The mastermind never even lived to see the bank he supposedly murdered 3 men to build. A dead man cannot run a cartel. In his final weeks, Morgan was not plotting anything. He was dying in a hotel room in Rome, old and exhausted and afraid, muttering about his enemies. He never saw the bank he is accused of killing for. And the theory itself? No survivor ever said it. No newspaper printed it. No enemy of Morgan's ever whispered it. It did not exist until a conspiracy book in 2002, and it only went viral when QAnon picked it up in 2017. It is not 100 years old. It is younger than the smartphone. The Titanic was not murdered. It was hubris and cut corners, and a captain steaming too fast through an ice field he had been warned about. It was an accident, the most expensive accident in history. The missing binoculars, the silent ship, the too few lifeboats. Every eerie detail has the same dull answer. Not a plot, just negligence and arrogance and terrible luck, stacked one on top of another. And the chairman of the line that built her did not die a martyr for any conspiracy. He climbed into a lifeboat and survived, and spent the rest of his life a national disgrace. That is what guilt looked like that night. Not a mastermind, a coward. So if the theory is this easy to disprove, why won't it die? Why does something in you still want it to be true? Because the parts that are true are genuinely disturbing. The Federal Reserve really was written in secret by a cartel who used fake names and lied about it for 25 years. A private banker really was more powerful than the government. When the real history is that shadowy, a murdered ship feels like just one more step. And that is the trap. Real conspiracies leave evidence, memoirs, testimony, paper trails, the way Jekyll Island did. Invented ones leave only a feeling. The whole game is learning to tell the difference. So here is what we won't do. We won't tell you the Titanic was murdered because the evidence says it wasn't. But we won't tell you to simply trust the powerful either, because Jekyll Island proved they will lie whenever it suits them. What you get to decide is bigger than one shipwreck. It is how much of the official story you take on faith, and whether you can hold two ideas at once, that the men who run the world really do keep secrets, and that not every tragedy is one of them. The Titanic took 1,500 people, 3 of the richest men alive, and 100 years of arguments down with it. This has been fortune and ruin. Decide carefully and subscribe, because there are more of these than you would ever believe.